Okay, hello investors. Thank you so much for joining me. I tried to do this as a live stream, but I'm not able to figure this out. I've got for 2 weeks already. I've had this problem with the buffering, and it's just killing me. Anyway, so I'm going to kick this off. I've got three topics to discuss today. Why to stay invested, something that I wanted to highlight to you guys, which is called the stock stop clock. And then I'm going to go through at the end and talk about free book recommendations. So I run this on a Friday. Typically, I run this at 9 a.m. Eastern Time in the US. But as you can see, I've had a bit of a hiccup with the data, with the buffering. So I've kind of just recorded this right now, and then we'll kind of see how it goes. So this is what I wanted to highlight. So I've got, if I can just skip this ahead, give me a second. Yeah. So right now in December, we've got a problem, right? Because right now it's kind of a tax loss season, and a lot of people are really looking at their stocks in a 52-week low. Okay, and if you think about it, like there's so much pain in the market right now in the sectors that I follow, which is kind of quote unquote tech, and everyone is looking for an exit, right? So if you think about it, right, the big money, they're not going to get involved in, let's say, buying a DocuSign or getting involved with the Peloton. It's just not worth the career risk. They have to think about their bonus, and there is no way that a stock like DocuSign or Teladoc or whatever, it can't fall another 30%. Why would someone bother now taking an investment in one of these companies when that's going to likely fall off? There's a possibility, at least, that could fall off further, and then investors are kind of like selling because of tax reasons, and the hedge fund manager, they're not going to be wanting to take that risk, so they're out. The retail investor, man, they're already holding so much pain right now. Why would they want to uh, average down further? If anything, they want to sell the stock to just kind of get rid of the pain. They don't want to have to go into 2022 thinking to themselves, "Oh man, I shouldn't have invested that at the peak of February 2021." In hindsight, that was the wrong thing to do. So there's all kinds of reasons why people would just not be wanting to invest in stocks right now. So I get that. That's ultimately very few people are going to have more than a 30-day time horizon right now. Now, what I've said before, and I'll say again, when you buy shares, you are buying a portion of the business. You are the business owner. And the way that I explain this to people is that if you think about it, if you might know everything there is to know about Apple. You might be the biggest Apple fan there is. But until you bought a share of Apple, for example, not that I'm recommending Apple, but until you bought a share of Apple, you haven't really thought about Apple as the business. You're just kind of excited. It's the Peter Lynch thing, right? You know the company well. You kind of pent up on all that marketing that they put out. And this is not just about Apple. I mean, you can look at anything like Peloton, like whatever. You know the business, or you use the software. You kind of have that familiarity. But until you bought a share of the business, you're not really thinking like a business owner. What's more, often cases, the business is improving their earning power, and it doesn't do that every 90 days. Or it might not even do that, let's say, over a 6 month period. It's bumpy, like life is kind of volatile, businesses are kind of volatile, and you kind of go through a period where things are just ticking along, and then there's kind of a bit of a one step forward and then two steps back, and it's life, right? Life gets in the way. So that's the business, but over the period of a year, there is still an increase in earnings power. Earnings power is like the free cash flow, the earning power of the business between now and infinity. Now, the business might not be having free cash flow right as of right now, but there is the ability of the business to increase its free cash flow over time. So it might be free cash flow negative right now, it might be free cash flow negative next year, but it has the potential over time because it's taking market share, it's improving it's increasing its revenues, expanding its margins. There's a potential for it to increase the earnings power of the business or the free cash flow of the business over time. So the business is volatile, but the share price is even more volatile because even though if the business is increasing its earnings power, and you might not see that represented every single quarter. Furthermore, At the same time, you're looking at the share price every day, and the share price is going down and down and down, and you're like, oh my god, I feel like this investment doesn't make any sense, and you're kind of like, I hate this investment, I hate it, and like get rid of it. Start off the new year with something fresh, and you know that's not the right way to invest. If you make an assessment that I want to buy XYZ business, I would say stay with the business for at the very minimum 12 months. And I'll come back to a bit more about that later on. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is that often cases you're going to see the share price move dramatically higher or lower. Okay. And everybody's like, oh, should I buy now? Should I sell now? Like the share price is moving and I have to act. Everyone else is acting. I have to act. CNBC, Yahoo Finance, everyone's talking about that. I need to do something. And often cases, the real money is not made in having those kind of acts where you're kind of having to react to the share price movement. But often cases, you'll find that the real money is made by doing nothing. And it's quite paradoxical, but just sitting on your hands and doing nothing, oftentimes you just be impressed. Like, for example, I'll give you a stock that I kind of follow from the sites, Salesforce. The number of times the Salesforce, after its earnings results, has just fallen the stock, and then it kind of trickles back up, and then it goes for earnings result and it falls down. And you look at the share price over the, let's say, a 2 year time frame, which is not like, I'm not just saying since the day it was IPO. I'm just looking like, look at it over a kind of a length of period of time of more than like 12 months, and you see that this thing is volatile like mad, but it's increasing. And you can have your own opinions on Salesforce. Maybe you own the stock, maybe you don't, doesn't really matter. But that ability for you to just sit on your hands is really, really important. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is that you're trying, it doesn't matter if you're a growth investor or a value investor, these are all the same things. It doesn't really make any difference. You're trying to buy shares in the business that in the future could be worth more. Doesn't matter if it's whatever you want to call yourself, a value investor, whatever, it doesn't make any difference. You're trying to buy something for less than it's worth so that you're deferring that cash today so that in the next 2 years or so, the value of that cash is higher as represented by the share price. So when you're trying to buy something for below intrinsic value, so this is the value of the business, the market can still continue selling off because nobody knows that you, John Peterson or whatever, have bought your shares. No one knows, nobody cares. And it's not that, oh, I bought it, so all of a sudden the shares are going to go higher. And a lot of people want to quote unquote buy the dip, oh, I'm going to buy the dip. And it's nonsensical. I mean, buy every time that your salary comes in, allocate a portion to equally disperse over your portfolio, but remove this kind of passion for, oh, I had cash on the side, now I need to kind of deploy it. I'm going to go in hard, double or nothing. And it doesn't work like that because you don't know that in the start of January, start of February, things can be even worse off. You need to invest in a way that allows you not to become overwhelmed. You need to invest in a way that you are buying in small amounts, slow, steady, safely. And you do that, and you have to be quite regimented with yourself. And as I say every single time in every one of my videos, whenever you buy a stock, write down 3 bullet points why you bought that stock. And one of the bullet points must include the valuation. And before you act again next time on that same stock, go through your bullet points. See, this is what I thought. This is how things translated. And does it make sense now? Because you don't want to be in a position that you only own 4 stocks in your portfolio. And you're like, oh God, you need to stay invested in the business for a while to see your return. And some people said to me, oh, I'm going to buy XYZ, and if it goes to 100 quickly, I'm out. It's like, why would you be out? Like, if you've been so lucky to have bought an investment that is actually working out favorably, provided that it's not, very, very overvalued, like, why would you be out just because the share price is going up? Share prices go up and then it kind of goes flat and it goes up and down. Like, it makes no sense to me that just because that round number gets hit and you've kind of, let's say, done a 60% or even 100%, like reassess at the time how things look. And they coming up with these kind of preconditions. Oh yeah, like if stock goes down 50% I'm out, or if the stock goes up 50% I'm out. Like people are just so triggered. I mean, it's crazy. And I say to the person, nobody knows that you bought the shares. Just the share price will move towards intrinsic value, irrespective of the price that you bought. It doesn't matter. It makes no difference the price that you bought. You bought it high, bought it lower. It doesn't make any difference. You get paid proportionally for the time you wait. So it's not like trying to time the market. It's time in the market that you rewards you. Okay. So this is something that I wanted to highlight as well. This is quite interesting. So stop, clock. I was going to get a little picture for this to kind of highlight to you what I mean by this. But basically, if you think of a stopwatch, that's how I'm trying to kind of say. So whenever you exit a stock to buy something that's cooler, something that's better, you have to, it's a stock that causes you to stop the clock. So whenever you make an investment, I always say, okay, if you buy a business, you should make a contract with yourself to write down the three bullet points that I just described earlier. And you should make a contract with yourself that you're not going to exit that business in less than 12 months unless something really dramatically goes wrong. So you stay with that business. If you exit that business before 12 months, you are stopping the clock again and you have to rewind it back for the new stop. And by doing that, it's forcing you to have this time horizon where you say, if I'm selling out of the business, is an admission that I've made a mistake. It's because I'm having to start the clock again. So it really kind of, it's like the Buffett 20 card punch. It's really thinking like that. You know, you have a lifespan of, let's say, 20 years. I call this a 20-year horizon, 20-year game of investing. And every time that you kind of sell something before the 12 months is out, it's like you starting the clock again. So don't sell out of a business because the share prices have gone too high quickly. You might be on to something that's doing quite well for you, and don't just sell it to rebalance the portfolio, whatever. In the worst case, you've got a winner, and you put 10% of your capital, and it like goes to 100% of the position doubles, and it's like 20% of your portfolio, provided everything else stays the same. Why would you punish your portfolio because you've managed to find a winner? I mean, it makes no sense to me. If you're lucky enough, I'm not saying staying invested forever. I'm not saying stay invested for the next 10 years. I'm not even saying staying invested for the next 5 years. But there's a big difference between staying invested for 30 days and staying invested for, let's say, 2 years. There's a big difference there. And the way I think about it is whenever you go to buy a house, you go and visit a house and you go during the daytime and you go in the nighttime and you go and look around the neighborhood and you try and see what other prices of other houses have gone in the neighborhood and you spend some time reflecting and you think about it, okay? And then you move into the house. And once you've been in that house, it takes you, let's say, 2, 3, 4 months for you to really get familiar with it. You know, you kind of like really get attuned to the house and the sounds of the houses and stuff like that. And businesses are so much more complicated than houses. So how could you expect to be really attuned to a business in 30 days? I follow a lot of companies, and very often, like the first few times that I look at a company, I'm just kind of like, yeah, that's interesting, blah, 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 and I'm kind of forget about it. And it's a process that I'll kind of revisit it next quarter, kind of, oh, yeah, this is what I thought. I read from my article, okay, so this is what I thought, da, 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 and I kind of refine or iterate my thinking process. And I'm like, okay, this is what I thought, this was wrong, this is right, okay, okay. And I move on. And then the next time, like, so we're already kind of 6, 9 months down the road. I'm like, oh, okay, so this kind of looks interesting. The valuation kind of makes sense. And then I kind of go forward another. So by that time, I've already known the company for a year. So I'm kind of familiar with the sector, kind of know what's happening here. So I've accumulated that knowledge. And then I'm making a decision at that point in time, provided that the valuation makes sense. And that's how long it's taken me. And I do this, man, every single day. I do this like countless hours a day. So that's the process that you need to think about when it comes to investing. And a lot of people kind of want to rush the process. They kind of like, and I've done this as well. You know, it's perfectly human. You kind of see something and it's kind of, oh, this looks really cool, and it's like, and I've done plenty of mistakes. and I will continue to make plenty of mistakes. And I always say you don't learn a lot when you've made the right decision. When you've made an investment and the investment goes up, you haven't really learned a lot because it worked out. You don't think about it, right? Everyone is a buy and hold forever as long as the share price is going up. But when the share price starts going down, you gotta like, oh yeah, okay, well, let me think this through. And that's when you really learn. That's the payment that you've made to learn that lesson. So every time that you've made a mistake, it's like the cost that you have to pay to learn the lesson. And if you kind of invest for a long period of time, each lesson becomes quite expensive when you make a mistake. So you kind of have to really think that through. So try to have a discipline where you allocate a proportion of your salary on the first day of each month, whenever salary comes in, irrespective of whether the market is up or down, and try and split that capital infusion into at least three names. And the reason why I say that is because it strips away all the narrative. However you feel about a company or a stock or whatever, it removes that. Because if you're splitting it equally over three companies, it's like it's all the same. Because if something is in the portfolio, there's a reasonable chance equally that they will do well. And if you have absolutely very strong doubts about that business, if you really think, okay, that business doesn't make any sense to me, it shouldn't be in your portfolio. So just try to do some kind of rules of thumb for yourself, some checklists to remove as much as possible of the behavioral aspects of investing. Because behavioral finance is, it's an amazing field, and it just shows you so we really fall prey to our own mistakes consistently. I mean, Daniel Kahneman talks about it that even though he spent his whole life trying to understand human nature, he still makes mistakes as well. And he might be a bit quicker to recognize after he's made the mistake, but he also makes a mistake. So, if you read Daniel Kahneman's biography, I think it was Michael Lewis, I can't remember what it's called, An Unlikely Friendship. You can see it's evidently someone that is like so incredibly talented and intelligent. And if he's making these mistakes, and if Warren and Charlie are making these mistakes, we're not them. Those are one or two people in 7 billion. So we have to kind of have rules of thumb to kind of try as much as possible to strip out the errors that we impose on ourselves, such as, oh, the stock is down, I've got to act. Okay. Now I want to kind of bring up free book recommendations that I hope that you'll find useful. So, book number one is called The Outsiders, and The Outsiders is a great book. It follows several people like Warren and the Teledyne guy, misses his name, and it talks about John Malone, and it talks about how each one of them looks towards the capital allocation process in a very similar way. It's kind of they're written up differently. Like one looks at, let's say, free cash flow, and then one looks at, let's say, EBITDA for John Malone, EBITDA with leveraged EBITDA, or earnings power for Warren Buffett. So all about talk about different things, but they're all very much talking about the ability of the business to grow free cash flow, and particularly important, how that free cash flow gets allocated. So it's a book that is not difficult to read, but it just really makes you think through that free cash flow and how it's deployed in the business. And one of the great things that everyone talks about is when you're investing alongside a founder, sometimes, not always, but sometimes it predisposes you to do quite well, provided that you learn to sit on your hands. Now, I'll give you a quick example when that doesn't work. So if you look at, let's say, Apple, when Steve Jobs, he basically sold most of his Apple stock way too early. And yes, he did make a lot from Pixar, but it just goes to show that even the founder of the business, they're not superhuman. They don't have a crystal ball that can tell you how things are going to work out. But you know that if you're investing along the founder and they have a lot of stock in the company, they're highly motivated to see their quote unquote baby do quite well. And if it's all about odds in investing, and I say to everyone, you should try to aim as much as possible to be right 6 out of 10 times. That's a 60% success rate, that means 40% time you're going to be wrong. And you just think about that, right? You're aiming to be wrong 40% of the time. And it's quite like worrisome when you think about that. That's like the best you can do is to be wrong 40% of the time. And when it comes to investing, frustratingly, it's not that like you get like, oh, one investment worked out, one didn't, one did, one didn't, one did, one didn't. It can go a period of time where you're kind of doing, let's say, a quarter or 6 months or 9 months of investment failure after investment failure after investment failure. It doesn't neatly line up. And you have to build that temperament to understand that inside of you. Um, you need to kind of think about that because it really messes with your mind because it's a very difficult investment process to be able to kind of understand that this is going to have so many failures one after the other. The next book that I want to talk about is Five Rules for Successful Stock Investing. This is by Pat Dorsey. The start of the book is really simple, and I highly recommend that. Later on in the book, it gets slightly more advanced, but don't let that put you off. It's a terrific book, and it's one of the only books that I've seen, and I read a lot of books, that spends a lot of time talking about the proxy statement. And I find it quite interesting because the SEC is forcing the company to write down, without any kind of spin, what the company is actually doing, how much stock does the owners have in the business, how are they compensated. So it's a legal document that they're putting out and they're given to you as the investor, and you should be able to understand just the tiniest little bit about it. You don't need to understand everything, but they're quite open and honest, saying, hey, the business did well or didn't do well, so we compensated the CEO X amount. You don't need to read every single thing, but just glance at it, just kind of skim through it and just kind of say, okay, yeah, this is what I think. Yeah, looks okay. Just spend some time getting familiar with it. It's like everything in life. The more you do it, the more familiar you are, the easier it becomes. And the valuation part of the book, I mean, it talks a lot about DCF, discounted cash flow analysis. You can take that or not as you want. I don't use a DCF. I know it's quite popular, but I think it's absolutely nonsensical because nobody can really discount how things are going to look out 5 years from now. I don't invest like that. There are many ways to invest. I just try and get a sense for on the business, how it's positioned relative to others in the industry. Just a bit of common sense. I just don't want to kind of. You don't need to be absolutely spot right, and you can use a DCF and you can calculate interest rate and you can calculate how much you're going to discount back the risk and all this. You can spend, and I can give you a very accurate number, but it's actually meaningless. So I prefer just to go in and say, okay, yeah, actually, I don't really know how things are going to play out, and they could kind of play out like this. I could get lucky, but you just kind of leave yourself so much margin of safety to kind of, even if things kind of go a bit sour, you're able to sit on your hands and you don't force into a position to act. The final book that I want to talk about is Creative Cash Flows. Creative Cash Flows is probably one of the best books that I've ever read about investing. It's particularly about accounting. And I think, in my opinion, it's much better than financial shenanigans. It's more difficult. I've read this book 4 times. It's a bit dated. I think it was written in 2003 or something like that by Mulford. And it is a difficult book. Everyone that I've read it recommended to, they read about the chapter and they drop it. Uh, Hopefully you would give it a chance. Don't know if you will, but it is a difficult book, but it really forces you so much to think about free cash flow and just trying to spend some time understanding that the free cash flow that company reports isn't often actually the real cash flow that the business does, because sometimes the business has some different entries that they capitalize different kind of things slightly. So this is probably the most important book to really understand how a cash flow works. Because if you understand the cash flow statement inside out and how things are being recorded there, it gives you much more staying power to stay with the business for this, what I call a long period of time. So oftentimes you look through and there's like some kind of odd entries there, and it's taking capital away. I've seen some great businesses that look on paper really, really well, but there's some kind of minority interests that are just taking cash away from the business, and the free cash flow looks amazing, but all that cash flow is actually going to out to the minority interest, and then you end up in a position where the business doesn't have enough capital to grow because they give it to the minority interest, then they leverage the balance sheet, and then things go sour, and there's not enough free cash flow to pay back debt, and everything goes sideways or worse. So anyway, I hope you found this useful. I'm very sorry that it didn't really work with the streaming. Yeah, I think I will just probably go and do like this from now on Fridays. And yeah, I would like to say thank you so much for everyone for your time. And yeah, I hope to see you soon. Don't forget to drop me a like, and I'll see you next time. Bye.